Hello, Wanderers. I am not sure how much of today's tale will be adapted in the planned 5 seasons for the Rings of Power show, but let me just say that this episode is likely a huge spoiler alert. However, the Silmarillion was published in 1977, so you've had all this time to read it yourself. Today we will explore the tragic drowning of the mighty kingdom of Númenor, as told in a tale called the Calabaith in J.R.R. Tolkien's book called The Silmarillion. If you like what you hear today, please let me know by leaving a 5-star review. Welcome! In the Lord of the Rings podcast, we wander the world of J.R.R. Tolkien by exploring the foundational epic stories from the deep past of Middle-earth. If you enjoyed Tolkien's books, or maybe Peter Jackson's movies, or perhaps you're excited for Amazon Studios' new series, The Rings of Power, and you want to dive deeper into the rich world of Middle-earth, then listen and subscribe. Magavainen, fellow wanderers. Today's episode date is July 28. We are 36 days away from the debut of Amazon's Rings of Power series. On this day in Middle-earth, in the year 2941 of the Third Age, Gandalf has departed from Bilbo and the dwarves, who are traversing the Forest of Mirkwood, and as of tomorrow, July 29th, in the year 1954 of our age, the Fellowship of the Ring is published. Happy 68th birthday, Fellowship! This is adapted from the Today Middle-earth History calendar on theonering.net. Let's check the map. These map checks are inspired by the beautiful maps that accompany the Lord of the Rings books, and I hope give you the context for today's story. If none of this makes sense, please listen to a few previous episodes and catch back up. It is the Second Age of Middle-earth. The mighty kingdom of Númenor has been established in the midst of the sea, and while the men who live there are blessed with long life, they begin to long for the promise of immortality enjoyed by the Valar and the Elves. Sauron, in a wise and fair form, has been captured by the king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazon, but within 3 years has manipulated his way to being Ar-Pharazon's most trusted advisor. Because of this, the Númenorians have turned away from the worship of Eru Ilúvatar and instead worship the dark. A contingent of the people stay true to the Valar. They call themselves the Faithful, and are led by Amandil and his son Elendil and grandsons Isildur and Anarion. Sauron desires to destroy the kingdom of Númenor and attempts to convince Ar-Pharazon to break the ban of the Valar and sail into the west. Let's start by looking at Sauron's lies to Ar-Pharazon. Sauron convinces Ar-Pharazon that the Valar are immortal only because they have, quote, possessed themselves of the land where there is no death, and claims that the gift of unending life can be won by men, quote, of might and pride and great lineage, such as Ar-Pharazon, finally ending with, quote, great kings take what is their due. Ar-Pharazon believes Sauron and his lies, and begins to plan a war against the Valar. Amandil, the leader of the Faithful and father to Elendil, hears of Ar-Pharazon's plan and decides that he will sail into the west first, like Elendil of old, to plead before the Valar, quote, for mercy upon men and their deliverance from Sauron the Deceiver. He instructs Elendil and Elendil's sons to prepare their own ships, gather what faithful they can find, and leave Númenor to be exiles in Middle-earth. Elendil and his sons do prepare their ships to depart. Upon their ships, the faithful take such heirlooms as they had, including some jewels and scrolls of lore, as well as 7 stones that have been gifted to them by the elves. These 7 stones would be the Palantiri, the seeing stones that we see in the Third Age. Isildur, Elendil's son, places in his ship the young sapling tree that sprouted from the fruit of Nimloth. Thus, Elendil, Isildur, and Anarion wait on their ships on the eastern end of the island, awaiting, quote, a sign that did not come. Yet changes were happening to the weather of Númenor. Before now, the weather had been appropriate to the needs of the people, but now, quote, the sky itself darkened. Númenorian ships suffered wrecks on the open seas, which had never before happened, and out of the west, great clouds in the shape of an eagle would loom over the land, and some even brought lightning and thunder to Númenor. These eagle-like clouds the men called, quote, the Eagles of Manwë, and some would repent of their evil ways for a time, but others grew more angry and rebellious, claiming that the lords of the west had made acts of war upon them first. The dome of Sauron's temple was struck by lightning and split, but the temple itself was unharmed. Sauron climbed to the top of the temple and, quote, defied the lightning and was unharmed, and in that hour men called him a god and did all that he would. Which, technically, Sauron is sort of like a demigod, being one of the Maiar, that class of divine beings who serve the Valar. One additional weather change. Smoke began to bellow from the holy mountain, Meneltarma, though it had been nearly 50 years since anyone had set foot at the summit. Finally, Ar-Pharazon has prepared his fleet. The ships were so numerous that they darkened the western shore of Númenor and appeared as, quote, an archipelago of 1,000 isles. The ships awaited for the command from Ar-Pharazon. And where was Sauron now? Did he have the bravery to sail with the Númenorians and attack the Valar? Of course not. He knew their war was in vain. He, quote, withdrew into the inmost circle of the temple, and men brought him victims to be burned. Ar-Pharazon has his throne set on a massive ship, and gives the command to sail west, in defiance of the ban set by the powers of the world. Quote, In that hour, the trumpets of Númenor outrang the thunder. They sail west. Ar-Pharazon's fleet surrounds the elven island of Tol Eressëa, and the elves mourned for the tall masts of the Númenorian ships blocked the light of the setting sun. But they sailed on, and finally Ar-Pharazon came to the Undying Lands. All was silent, and almost he turned back, but, quote, pride was now his master. He leaves his ship and steps on to the shore. Now the Valar had known of the coming of men into the west, but it seemed in this matter their wisdom and counsel failed them. What were the Valar to do when Ilúvatar's own children claimed war against them? Manwë, king of the Valar, calls upon Ilúvatar, and the Valar step aside as Ilúvatar demonstrates his power over his creation and literally changes the world. First, a great chasm opens underneath the sea between Númenor and the Undying Lands. The waters of the sea flow into the chasm, and Ar-Pharazon's mighty fleet is drawn into the abyss, quote, and they were drowned and swallowed up forever. For those mortal men who had set foot in the Undying Lands, like Ar-Pharazon and a few warriors, a landslide buries them, and they, quote, lie imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten. The Undying Lands, including Aman, Valinor, and the elven isle of Eressëa, were hidden from the reach or sight of mortal man. The great island of Númenor, gift to men from the Valar, quote, was utterly destroyed. The chasm under the sea had opened right at the foundations of the island, and it fell, quote, down into darkness. Before the island was drowned, Meneltarma, Ilúvatar's holy mountain, suddenly burst with fire, and a great wind rushed over the land. Then the island slid into the sea, quote, with all its children, and its wives, and its maidens, and its ladies proud. Not to mention the towers, harbors, tombs, riches, and lore. It was all lost. Tar Miriel attempted to ascend the steps to the summit of Meneltarma, but she was overtaken by the waters. What about the faithful, Elendil and his sons, waiting on their ships off the eastern coasts? It is unknown if Elendil ever reached Valinor to plead for the cause of men. But by the grace of the Valar, the faithful survived the drowning of Númenor. Elendil had refused to go to war, and had evaded Sauron's soldiers who had come to sacrifice him in Sauron's temple. But the great wind that rushed over Númenor filled the sails of the faithful, and mighty waves swept their ships to the east towards Middle-earth. After many days, they landed back in Middle-earth. Let's pause the story here for a second and take a look at Aragorn's crowning in The Return of the King. Aragorn holds the crown aloft and says these words. You'll have to pardon my Elvish. Et eirelo endorena utulien, si nome maruvan ar ildanyar ten ambar meta. Yeah, I think I like Viggo Mortensen's singing rendition in the movie a lot better. Anyway, the next paragraph says, quote, those were the words that Elendil spoke when he came up out of the sea on wings of the wind. Out of the great sea to Middle-earth I am come. In this place will I abide, and my heirs unto the ending of the world. Another token of the landing of the faithful was the Stone of Eric. This is the stone that Aragorn calls the Dead Army to in order to fulfill their oath. This stone, quote, had been brought out of the ruin of Númenor and there set by Isildur at his landing. Elrond was alive at the time of this great changing of the world, and in the Council of Elrond, in the Fellowship of the Ring, Elrond gives a summary of the events of the Second Age, including, quote, of Númenor he spoke, its glory and its fall, and the return of the kings of men to Middle-earth, out of the depths of the sea, borne upon the wings of storm. Then Elendil the Tall and his mighty sons, Isildur and Anarion, became great lords. We're not done yet. If you like this episode, please leave a review and share with your friends. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be right back.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
Welcome back. Elendil and his sons would go on to found the Kingdom of Arnor in the north, of which the Shire was a part, and the Kingdom of Gondor in the south. Elendil ruled in the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom was jointly ruled by Isildur and Anarion. In Gondor, two mighty fortresses are built, each appearing to be named after each son, Minas Ithil and Minas Anor, which also reminds me of the original names of the moon and sun, Isil and Anar, which I covered in episode 9. However, these fortresses would later become known respectively as the Morgul Vale and Minas Tirith. In Minas Tirith, Isildur planted the sapling tree, as recounted by Elrond in the Fellowship of the Ring. Quote, "There in the courts of the king grew a white tree, from the seed of that tree which Isildur brought over the deep waters, and the seed of that tree before came from Erisea, and before that out of the uttermost west, in the day before days when the world was young." So the line of the kings was able to continue, as Tar Palantir, Miriel's father, had foretold, at least for a little while. And what of Sauron? What of his fate when Númenor sank into the sea? He was afraid of the wrath of the Valar, for his intent was only the death of the Númenorian king and people, and he wildly underestimated the Valar's response to the breaking of the ban. As the fleet sailed into the west, Sauron sat laughing in his temple. He started making plans for what he would do now in the world, now that he was free of the challenge of the Dunedain. Even as he celebrated his enemy's defeat, quote, "His seat and his temple fell into the abyss." So sudden was the sinking of Númenor that Sauron's body also fell into the abyss, but his spirit was able to arise from the deep and pass back to the black land of Mordor. Yet from this time forth he, quote, "could never again appear fair to the eyes of men. In his tower Barad-dûr he again took up his ruling ring, until he could make a new body for his spirit, quote, an image of malice and hatred made visible, and the eye of Sauron, the terrible, few could endure." Here our tale ends, with the drowning of the mighty kingdom of Númenor, gifted to men for their service to the elves in the First Age, and established by Elrond's own brother Elros. The downfall of the kingdom of Númenor marks the end of the Second Age of Middle-earth, and the beginning of the Third. Númenor is often equated with the legend of Atlantis, and there are certainly some resemblances, especially in the names given to Númenor by men after its downfall. Quote, "But the exiles, if they turned towards the west in the desire of their hearts, spoke of Mar Nufalmar, that was whelmed in the waves, Calabeth, the downfallen, Atalante, in the Alaran tongue." The exiles of Middle-earth also believed that the summit of the holy mountain, Meneltarma, rose again as a small island in the midst of the great sea, but they never found it, and those who searched for it continued to sail west, and came not again to the Undying Lands. So they said, quote, "All roads are now bent." Yet the wise among them believed that a straight road to the Undying Lands still existed, quote, "for those that were permitted to find it." Please join me in the next episode, where we'll rewind the time a bit and examine the forging of the Rings of Power. My friends, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing with your friends. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Lore of the Rings Podcast. For feedback on the show, please email me using the link in the show notes. Until next Thursday, remember, not all those who wander are lost.